Thanks, John, and thanks for having me, even though you're my employer and therefore didn't have much of a choice. Thanks so much to everyone who's already donated and plans to donate to those on the front lines of caring for all those affected by the coronavirus. I'm happy to be here today to talk about the sort of evolution of a very interesting industry, and that is the disinformation industry. Um, I have a fair number of slides, so I'm gonna, try and stick to time and blitz through them, but we'll be answering questions, as Sean mentioned, afterwards. So hopefully we can get into more of a discussion there. Okay, so a lot of focus, of course, on disinformation in recent years has been on nation-state actors, and they're using disinformation to influence events primarily outside of their border. And at the same time, there's always been this, sort of for-profit side online, and particularly over the years, for-profit side using disinformation to make money. And it's sort of the combination of what I would consider political disinformation with that growing for-profit industry that's taking advantage of political disinformation is kind of the thing that I've been looking at a lot lately. It might not be something that we've talked too much about in recent years, but I think those of us who work in this industry are increasingly seeing it as a major threat and sort of the evolution of the disinformation space. So that sort of nexus between the political disinformation side and the for-profit disinformation side that creates the disinformation industry. They might call themselves things like PR firms or black PR. It might be a digital marketing company. It might even be something that calls itself, a nonprofit organization. But in fact, we're seeing more and more of these organizations popping up that are actually selling, traditional disinformation services, things like social media influence, fake accounts, etc. So that's been a huge focus, and I want to talk about why, and it really comes down to just the rise in the number of players that we're seeing jump into this space. So a lot of my colleagues in the disinformation community who analyzes this have done some really great work, and there's a lot of good reading to be done here. So the Oxford Internet Institute put out a paper last year looking into the number of countries that have used computational propaganda, that's their sort of term for it, to manipulate public opinion. And of sort of the review of the world that they've done, they found 70 countries using computational propaganda, and 45 of those were considered democracies. The next number that I would draw your attention to is the number of countries that the Oxford Internet Institute discovered were working with a private company to sell computational propaganda services, so that disinformation industry that we're talking about now. And there's a reason why these services are popping up, and that's because there's a lot of money to be made in selling these services. So $235 million was the amount of revenue that the Global Disinformation Index found in a recent report that they put out in the fall. They took a look at 20,000 websites or domains that were collecting digital ad revenue and were using disinformation to do so. And from a subset of websites that they did sort of deep dives on, they estimated that these 20,000 websites were raking in this $235 million. So there's a lot of money to be made in this, and bad actors have noticed. So I wanted to give just a couple of examples that have been reported in the press of some of these companies or groups of individuals that have been uncovered. This is just a couple of those that have been uncovered sometime between 2019 and 2020, but it's absolutely just a fraction of what's been reported. Some of these are pretty interesting cases. One of my favorites, which I know it's bizarre to have a favorite troll farm, but nevertheless, was one that was uncovered in November of 2019 in Poland. It was a troll farm that was actually receiving subsidies from the Polish government to employ people with disabilities that were then running the troll farm, and they were providing trolling, armies and disinformation services for a variety of different companies and political parties in Poland. Most recently, you might have seen in the headlines, Facebook and Twitter announced a large-scale takedown of Russian-linked accounts that were being run in Ghana. There was a joint investigation conducted in part with CNN. They tracked down this troll farm that called itself the EBLA, a nonprofit out of Ghana that was actually being paid by the Russian government to conduct a disinformation campaign specifically targeting, trying to sow division within the Black community in the US. So I won't go into others, but these are some good articles I would highlight for further reading if this is an area of interest for you. So I wouldn't try to say that the disinformation industry is a thing that just started. Indeed, it really has been an evolution, and part of that is that the disinformation industry has learned a lot from traditional marketing and PR firms. So there's this sort of blending or sort of evolution of what we would consider, good, acceptable marketing PR practices into what sounds and looks a bit more on the disinformation for hire side of things. So a couple of those that I would raise as tactics that we're seeing employed. So on the good marketing PR side, we see, marketing firms targeting influencers. They might, have celebrities promoting certain products, experts that speak out, in favor of a product on their behalf, and media as well. How that translates on sort of the disinformation for hire side of things, they target influencers too. They might try to plant false information in front of an influencer to get them to help spread and amplify false content, either intentionally or unintentionally. They might create fake influencers as well. And really the intent is to spread that false content. The second tactic would be promoting content online, whether it's through digital ads or what have you on the marketing side. On the disinformation for hire side, there might be things like bot networks or troll armies, sock puppet accounts created to promote certain websites that spread disinformation or certain memes, and fake websites as well. The third tactic, generating website traffic. We're all trying to get, folks to come flock to our websites in droves. Well, so are those who are interested or are executing sort of a disinformation for hire company. So they also want to generate web traffic. So they might create clickbait content. They might create large social media groups or pages, networks of pages to spread disinformation or links to fake websites. They might have troll armies. And then the fourth thing I would raise is micro-targeting and tracking audiences. That's a very normal process for legit marketing and PR firms, but micro-targeting with false information is also something that disinformation for hire groups and companies use, and they use traditional marketing, digital marketing tactics, software, etc., to include things like ClickFunnels. They're trying to paint a picture for sort of, who's accessing their information, where they, how are their messages resonating, and that helps them refine their disinformation narratives to get them in front of more people. So it won't sort of come to the surprise of anyone, I'm sure, listening in, but just to drive home the point, what do the different parties get out of this? So if you're a government hiring a third party, marketing firm, PR firm that's is actually selling disinformation services, you get deniability. You get a level of distance between you and the actor, and it makes it harder for folks like myself who investigate this for a living to find you. And then, of course, the disinformation for hire services, as we already talked about, they get money. So we wanted to, at NESOS, really start to look into who's actually hiring the disinformation industry. There have certainly been a lot of examples, good examples that have come out publicly lately, and I flagged some of those, but I will go through a case study that we did at NESOS that appeared in the fall in the press once we released our findings. So you can read more about it in a New York Times article that was done in November. but I will go through that and how we track them down. So as most of these stories start, it started with a website. We came across, in just the regular sort of course of business, a website called Conservative Edition News. There were some interesting things that we noticed about it. It was registered in March 2019. Hopefully you can see on your screens, hopefully the font isn't too small, but some of the things that we noted, I'll just highlight a couple of them. So it was a WordPress site, pretty simple in design. No authors were listed on any of the articles, which is often a sign of potentially not having a robust media enterprise. So that we certainly noticed that. We looked at the content on the site, and a lot of the articles that were posted were taken from other websites as identifying as conservative news websites, and they were lightly edited. There, of course, were a lot of pay-per-click ads. And we noticed there was copyright information at the bottom of the website listing a company called Bavona Digital, and I'll get back to that later. This website pointed folks to a couple of things. In the beginning of its early life, there were a lot of, it posted a lot of petitions, so getting people to sign up with their contact information to sign these political petitions primarily. And it also pointed to a newsletter that you could sign up for. And when you signed up for it, it said in small letters that you were signing up to receive content from another website called rightwingfolks.com. This is just an image of two of the petitions that were used on this site early on. Very typical sort of tactic to get personal information, contact information for people quickly, using petitions that you can potentially get to go viral. And indeed, these petitions that you're seeing had thousands, hundreds of thousands of signatures, and spread across social media quite rapidly. The one on the right, you can see it went through a click funnel, as did all the petitions. So they were tracking the folks who were signing. So the other website that I mentioned, rightwingfolks.com, was created in 2018. Very similar, you'll recall from the screenshot of the first website I noted, almost identical in design and layout. Also in sort of the target audience. Again, no authors listed, pay-per-click ads. It listed on the bottom of the website a marketing firm called Raw Digital, which again, we'll get to later. And in old Whois registration records, it noted Macedonia as the country of registration. For anyone who is steeped in the disinformation world, Macedonia will ping in your mind as a place where a lot of the fake websites that came out during 2015 and 2016 targeting the US election were created and run by groups of Macedonian teenagers. So we started poking around and found another website called Liberal Edition News, similar name to Conservative Edition News, but geared towards those topics traditionally in the liberal camp, I suppose. Again, no authors listed, registered the same day as the first website, Conservative Edition News. Again, sort of same strategy in terms of what articles they included. So we went to social media to see where these were spreading. We found Facebook pages, and you'll see from the images, Conservative Edition News, Liberal Edition News were almost identical in design, had thousands of followers, and were promoting articles from their respective sites. So we looked at the unique IP addresses and the Google Analytics ID that led to 5 more sites. Some of them were inactive, and we knew that 2 of them at least were sites that had been registered in Vels, which is the small town in Macedonia where most of the Macedonian teenagers that I mentioned were creating and pushing fake news websites targeting the election. There was also a sort of hastily put together a website called Zipwire. There was a petition website called Demand Change Now, and another sort of animal-oriented, sort of spammy website that again was very consistent with the sort of TTPs of the Macedonian teenagers that we knew about from 2016. So we started taking a look at the company, Bavona Digital Inc., and then also the marketing firm, Raw Digital. You'll see from the screenshots that, again, very, very similar in design to include, down to the font choice. We found quickly that Bavona Digital was a Delaware core, registered and operated by a former Fox News executive named Ken LaCourte. And we saw in a public Facebook post that Mr. LaCourte, who's the CEO of Bavona Digital, informed his followers, quote, "I've been putting together a broad-based Facebook strategy, which now has nearly 2 million followers and a handful of quote unquote news silos to ensure that I get substantial traffic on my opening day. I'm slowly building the team." So at this point, we'd also found that there were several other Facebook pages that listed Bavona Digital as the operator, not just the conservative edition news and liberal edition news Facebook pages, but also sort of more clickbaity kinds of things about history and science and that sort of thing. So how the news silos worked. So Bavona Digital was sort of at the top, and the primary news site under this company was one called LaCourte News. And when we looked at the Facebook pages for these linked to these websites, we saw that they were also posting links to LaCourte News on both of those pages. They hired content writers to create the content, again, largely taken from other websites and edited. Some for conservative, taken from conservative-leaning websites, and then content writers for liberal edition news as well. And then there was the social media piece where they disseminated their content to try and get it to as many people as possible. And through these, their sort of social media campaign, they had millions of followers altogether. So we kept going back to Macedonia. We knew the Macedonians were involved in some form or fashion, and we found through archives and some general research, some advertisements for hiring Macedonian individuals, targeting people specifically from Vels, sort of the town of known for disinformation. We found at least 5 job openings between February and November looking for 2019, looking for content writers, editors, a videographer, etc. Not trying to hide the connection to the company, that it would be the company employing them, which we thought was interesting. They were very upfront about who they would be working for. But interestingly, there were no authors, as we said, listed on any of the sites. And so even though they were very transparent on Macedonian job boards, who they would be working for, there were essentially no official employees. So we were able to find through archived JSON and HTML and attribute actual individuals in Macedonia, including at least four from Vels and a 5th as well. So it was interesting to look. These people had LinkedIns, they had Facebook pages, and nowhere was their employment with Bavona Digital listed on their professional CVs. One of these individuals in particular had a long track record of running fake news sites. During 2016, this was just one example, a website called politicaldose.com. And you might question, well, how much impact did they have? Actually, some of the Macedonian fake news articles created by these individuals were some of the top news articles, quote unquote news articles, I should say, that circulated during the entire election in 2016. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I went really fast. I will just sort of end on sort of the larger point that there's sort of this gray area where disinformation and sort of the commercial side is starting to merge in a way that I think we really need to start having some tough conversations around sort of what is kind of disinformation and what is marketing. And Ken LaCourt was interviewed by the New York Times and had some very interesting remarks, which you can read in the article that was done. But I will just call out this particular quote. He talked about how he admired the work of these Macedonian teenagers. He learned about what they did in 2016 and their ability to market their websites and gain a lot of traction. And so that was why he employed them. For why he sort of created his enterprise, he said, "I wanted to find middle ground. Unfortunately, the things that work best right now are hyperactive politics. On one hand, that's at odds with what I want to do, but you can be more successful by playing the edgy clickbait game. Where does that line turn from good business to, that's sleazy?" Um, so I feel like I just spoke a mile a minute. I'm happy to answer questions in the Zoom room. Thanks so much for listening in. And again, thanks for donating to support the Nurses House. And please go ahead and donate if you haven't already. Thanks so much.